Excellent.
Right. Okay, we are streaming privately now.
Pete, is that correct?
Yeah, that's come through right name and private, so that's all good.
Okay, so are we best? Oh, look at that! It's like,
Delayed reaction.
that is peculiar. Okay, sorry, right, it's just foxed me completely. So, the best bet then, we leave it streaming,
Yep.
and then Pete, if you just switch it to, I'll just give you a ring, or I'll just text you and say, go live, go public.
Yeah, I will, it will keep this intro on at the start, but then when it's finished, when the live broadcast finishes, I can edit that out to cut it off just when it goes live, that's the only thing.
Yeah, so, but how would anybody be able to watch it if they only joined the public broadcast after 10 o'clock? By rewinding?
So, yeah, so you would be able to scroll the progress bar back to the start and watch essentially from when this started, I think. But once it's finished, I could cut that out. I'll leave it on the same link, so anyone who was to watch it later, but I think obviously with the reporters we've got will probably watch it live, don't they? Do we get off?
Yeah,
Okay.
we haven't said anything rude, so I think we're all right.
No. Okay. Well, hello to anybody who's bothered to rewind back this far. I hope you find the setup process instructive. And I can recommend my colleague here for high quality IT advice. So thank you all very much, and I shall see you later. Right, okay, I'll send you a text in a few minutes then, Pete. Cheers then, bye. Thanks, Ollie.
No worries. So,
Now, what do I need to do about the audio on this though? Do we need to turn the microphone off or anything?
well, when we did that last time, sound stopped. So, what you could do is plug in the headset, and that would mean that the microphone is designed to not pick up background noise. So it will reduce the amount of noise it picks up, and then just shut the door. Really.
Yeah, audio settings, it's saying USB device. So that's fine. So we can just leave it like that. Okay.
Thank you. Well, I know you're not very. Are you in Switchboard or something?
I'm on recording.
morning, everyone.
Morning all.
Morning, Matthew.
You right, Mark?
Yeah, I think so. Bit cool
Good.
this morning, walking the dog, but you know, as a man similar to you that's used to being in the southwestern climes, it's a bit chilly.
There's a bit of snow in West Cornwall. I saw on some photos on Twitter yesterday.
Yeah, I know.
Unheard of.
Yeah, my daughter told me there was just a little bit, and of course all the kids are demanding more snow, but they should know they don't get any in Cornwall.
Yeah, it doesn't last for long. Oh dear.
Okay, I think we'll make a start now. Welcome everybody. My name is David Nicholson. I'm the chair of the Worcester Acute Hospitals NHS Trust, and this is our February board meeting. It's a truncated board meeting in the sense that, given the COVID crisis that we're working through at the moment and the pressure on the organisation, the pressure on the staff, we want to reduce the onus of significant meetings like this one on the staff overall. So we've truncated it to 2 hours. We've got a lot to get through. So obviously we'll require everyone's discipline to enable us to do it. But there are some important things that we need to consider as part of this meeting. Can I? Apologies for absence. I've got Vicky Lewis and Rebecca Brown is attending. Are there any other apologies?
From Richard Oosterom.
Right, sorry, okay, Richard Oostrom, I know about, okay. So we'll make a start, just a few welcomes. Can I welcome Lorraine Mahachi? Is she here? Can she wave to us? Is she? I can't see her. Is she here? Can anybody tell me?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, welcome, Lorraine, who is Jagan Governance Sister for the county-wide endoscopy services, and she's come with Vicky as part of our reverse mentoring arrangement. So welcome, Lorraine. I hope you find it helpful. Please feel free to chip in if you feel the need to do so. And I think we've got Justin Jeffrey here. Is Justin here? I don't know whether she's here or she said she's coming later, but if you are here, Justin, welcome. The original Director for Midwifery and Gynecology, who'll be attending particularly to talk about the Ockenden and maternity report. And the final thing I just want to say before we start, I know that Matthew Hopkins is going to say something about Peter Pinfield in his thing, but just at the beginning, can I just put on record my sadness at the recent death of Peter Pinfield. I've known Peter for many years in my various roles in the NHS before I came to Worcestershire. At almost any national meeting I would take on patient and public involvement in the NHS generally, Peter would always be there, always be on the front row, always make really important points, always represent the best of Worcestershire. Even when there were difficulties here, he was always positive and supportive, but always challenging. And he'll be a great miss to the NHS as a whole, and we really do recognise that as a board. So I thought I'd put my personal record to begin with. I know that Matthew's going to talk a little bit about his role in relation to the hospitals that we're responsible for. Okay, so we're starting the meeting with a patient story. As you know, it's important that we get patient and staff's stories at the front of what we do, not just because they're interested in themselves and we can take action on the part of them, but also because I think they ground us at the beginning of the meeting to do this. Now, I know that Vicky is going to introduce this. But can I welcome Siobhan Gordon? We have the unique opportunity here of having both a member of staff, somebody who some might say single-handedly dealt with the Care Quality Commission over many years on our behalf, but also has been a patient of ours more recently, and we thought it would be a unique opportunity, I think, to get both a patient and a staff, from a staff perspective, about what the experience of being treated in our hospital would be. So welcome, Siobhan. Can I pass you on now to Vicky, who's going to introduce this?
Okay, thank you very much, David. And I think after that introduction, I don't need to say too much. I think board members will have a précis of the context for this patient experience. But I think I'm going to hand straight over to Siobhan and thank her very kindly for coming forward with this patient story, so we can reflect, particularly during COVID, the experience of somebody, and perhaps turn the tables on our thinking about perhaps some of the opportunities and positive experiences that this presents for a patient during this time. But I pass to Siobhan and we'll pick up questions afterwards, if that's okay, David.
Yes, fine. Siobhan.
So, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today. Most of you that know me know that I do like to chat a bit, so what I've done is I've prepared myself a script to keep me on track and to make best use of your time. So I think it's about 4.5 minutes of me reading to you. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to read it out to you, and then obviously take as many questions as you need to ask me about at the end. So this happened in November for me. So after experiencing excruciating stomach pain, I completed the NHS 111 app form, and guidance was that I should present myself at my local ED. On arrival, I was told by the nurse at the entrance to ED that I'd not followed the correct process and that I shouldn't be here. I did apologise. I was, as you know, I was very much in pain at the time. And I offered to phone 111 outside of our ED doors. However, the nurse did say, well, I'll let you in this time, but you really shouldn't be here. So I checked into the waiting room. It was quiet, patients really well spaced out, and within minutes I was called into triage. Soon after, an ED doctor called me into an immaculately clean room for review. It might sound strange to have noticed these things when in so much pain, but having worked in the trust for a number of years, you notice when things feel and look different. It's also worth mentioning to you that since the age of 17, I've had 12 operations. 5 of those operations were performed in private hospitals. 7 of those operations were performed by the NHS in 5 different hospitals. I've had many diagnostic tests along the way. Oh, and last year I had an angioplasty for that again. So I think it's fair to say that I'm quite an experienced patient. So back to ED. I did not want to be in hospital, and naturally I had my own fears about catching COVID. My experience was different this time to previous visits to ED. It was calm, it felt safe, and it was really clean. Tests were completed quickly, the ED doctor had time to explain what was happening, and I was moved to Surgical Clinical Decisions Unit. After a CT scan identified diverticular disease, I was moved to Beach B, where I spent the next 5 days. I didn't realise it at the time, but on reflection, I think this is the first time I've ever visited hospital where expectations were laid out to me about my role in keeping myself safe. So things such as stay in the bay, wear your mask, please wash your hands, and use the call bell rather than wandering around the wards looking for a nurse. It just seemed more focused, and the departments that I visited felt much safer. I had in fact had a very different experience of Beach B in 2013, probably my worst ever experience of being a patient in a hospital, and it just felt like a totally different hospital. This latest visit by far was the best I'd ever experienced as a patient. The only way I can explain it, like what it felt like, was that I was in a safe clinical environment rather than being in a public space receiving clinical treatment. So I hope that makes sense. That's just how it felt for me. Every step of the process I was met by calm staff who seemed to have much more time to talk to me, more time to explain the plan, and focus proactively on asking me about how I felt and how much pain I was in. The wards were uncluttered, and everywhere I visited, as I said, was clean. You have many hours to observe activities and behaviours when you're a patient, and the absence of visitors for me was really noticeable. While I completely accept that for some patients, visitors are very important, for me during this stay, I just needed to rest and feel safe. So I've just focused here on reading out to you 3 things. It's about safe, rest and dignity. So I felt safe because cleaners were able to clean properly. They did not spend half their time moving chairs and bags and asking people to move. They were able to clean right around the patient area. It was the most thorough cleaning I think I've ever seen. The wards and departments were quiet, there seemed less staff on the wards, and those that were on the wards were focused only on the patients. Nursing handovers were performed at the foot of the bed, 2 people but distance between them. I could hear what was being said about me. I felt less stressed, and I was invited to add to the conversation, and I was really assured that the next nurse in charge of my care that day was completely up to date with the plan. I have reactions to certain medications, and everyone seemed to be aware of this, so it meant I didn't have to keep repeating myself over and over again. I was able to rest because my family did not need to feel the need to all turn up en masse like they usually do, which meant that I could rest and sleep. I did not have to listen to other people's conversations all day, or the constant sounds of dragging chairs and all the other noisy distractions. For me, I was able to contact home or family on my terms when I felt like it. And the feedback from my family is that they felt less pressure about having to come up to the hospital and occupy my long days, and they had no guilt about that at all. In actual fact, my 2 boys told me that they never argued once about who was coming to see me when I was in hospital, so that was wonderful to hear. It was dignified because hospital wards are like bedrooms. Many of us are not looking our best or wearing our best. I've always found it really strange being looked upon in a hospital gown or in my PJs by people I don't know, but I accept the medical staff have to do this to make me better. However, I really don't enjoy it when other people I don't know come into my bed space area and grab chairs or ask to pop something in the bin when I'm poorly. With the type of issue that I was experiencing, and naturally I was back and forth to the restroom. It was so much more dignified for me to be able to move back and forth to the restroom without navigating a room full of strangers that I didn't know, and actually sometimes get into the bathroom and realising it was occupied by a visitor. Being able to have the nurse enter the bathroom as well without the fear of strangers looking upon me felt different. In my ward of 4, we had clear sight of each other and became a little unit that cared for each other. One of the patients had a particular set of needs, and staff worked tirelessly to protect her dignity. However, it was really challenging for them, and if visitors had been there, I know her dignity would have been breached, and I know I would have found that whole experience upsetting and really stressful. I particularly liked the clear curtains between the beds, as you could still be seen, you could still communicate with the other patients and staff, but the boundary was clear and you felt more protected. I do think they need some sort of indicator though on those clear screens, such as a logo or something, as during the night, in the dark and under the influence of morphine, I managed to walk straight into one of these screens and I couldn't really interpret what had happened. I thought it was glass. I've written a couple of comments about what I will remember about Beach B, and I'll share this. I think Martin's got a copy so he can share it with you, but I'll pick on a few here. I remember a nurse telling me she was going to stay as long as it took to ensure my cannula was resighted due to the pain the morphine was giving me on entering my hand. I remember the student nurses who tenderly held the hand of an elderly patient, telling her to take her time and there was no rush for feeding. The pharmacist asking the very same patient if she would like her phone put on charge, as she was aware her daughter always calls at midday. Visiting dietitians on FaceTime with patients and families talking about types of food for when they get home. The lowering of voices around in the evening around the nurses' station, being offered warm soup at 2 a.m. Hearing another patient being read to by a student nurse because she had said that she had managed to get all her jobs done. And seeing such a joined up team of nurses, cleaners, porters, medical and pharmacy staff, everyone seemed to know each other really well, and it just seemed such a lovely place to work. In terms of aftercare, I must admit I'm finding the whole process a little confusing. On discharge, I was told I would need a further test, not right away, but in about 4 to 6 weeks' time, and when the intestine had time to settle and was less inflamed. The following week, I was offered that test, the pre-op took place, appointment given at Kidderminster, prep kit sent to home, to be told 2 days later that actually it was too early and it was cancelled. I have since had another pre-op appointment weeks ago, but the nurse did not have any idea when that appointment would be, other than knowing that it would be at the spa. I've not heard anything since. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me.
Thanks, Siobhan. That was very enlightening and quite challenging, I think, to the kind of views that people might have about experience in hospital. But can I hand it over to members of the board? Anita, I think you've identified.
Thanks, Sir David. Siobhan, thank you so much for being really open and honest. And I think there were some really good bits. I'm sure it's pretty challenging kind of coming here and talking about this sort of stuff to all of us. there were some bits. I mean, most of that sounded brilliant, and I'm so proud of the trust that the staff stepped up in the way they did. That I think that there were some masses and masses of positives in that story. But right at the very beginning, the sort of your navigation of NHS 111 clearly didn't quite work. And I'm really interested, given that you know your way around the NHS and you would be a bit more informed than your average patient, is it obvious to you with hindsight what it was you were supposed to have done? And also, although the nurse did let you in, it did sound like it wasn't given you were in pain and distress, it didn't sound like that interaction perhaps was as reassuring and supportive as it might have been. So I don't know if you've got any reflections on that very initial part of the story. Thanks.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Anita. So in terms of the process, and most people that know me know I love the process. I didn't understand it as well as I probably thought I should. I knew that there was a change to moving to contacting NHS 111 prior to presenting an ED. I had already spent 20 hours at City Sandwell ED with an 82-year-old auntie in the run-up to actually coming here, and had followed that process via using the app from her house. So that worked right in that trust. Coming here, it didn't work so well. I have since found out actually you are supposed to phone, I believe, and the appointment is supposed to be booked for you. So no, I didn't understand that process, and I still don't think people are as clear as they could be on that. And yeah, absolutely. Standing at the front door of your own hospital, doubled over in pain, and being made to feel like it's a favour that they're letting you in, was really upsetting, because it's your first impression. Fortunately, and as you say, the rest of my experience as an inpatient was a positive one. But it felt I felt like I was in the way, initially.
Okay, thanks. Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Siobhan, for regaling us with your experience of coming to the trust, and your candour. And as someone that's used to looking at process, procedures, and improvement, I think it takes on a particular importance. Anita asked the question I was aiming towards, but the other thing that I had in mind, as you are a long-standing member of our trust and relatively well known as well, and rightly so, can you comment on the treatment and care and compassion that you saw others receiving, and the fact that it wasn't just you as a member of staff, it was everybody, I'm hoping, that you witnessed? Is that the case or not? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said that I'm well known. I might be well known to some people, but I'm not as well known as anybody on the ward. So maybe a ward manager and matrons, but not the staff in general like that. So no, I don't think it mattered who I was or what I was doing there. A lot of other patients, well, actually all the other patients I've seen which seem to be treated the same as me, quickly, and that's the most important thing in ED for me. When you're in ED, you need to be, your pain needs to be controlled. You need, your fear needs to be settled, and it was just constant. People were in, out. It was. I've never seen it like that before. The other thing about ED, I just want to mention, quite often when you go to ED, and I have been to our ED and not had a seat because of the, amount of additional people accompanying other patients. So, I just wanted to sort of mention that. But no, I think the compassion was wonderful. Everywhere I went, Skidoo, ED, out, even just waiting outside radiology with other patients, everybody was treated the same, with great compassion. It's the first time I've ever sat in a hospital bed and cried at the way other people were being treated. Honestly, there was a lady opposite me, and it was just incredible to watch how beautiful she was treated. The student nurses were absolutely fantastic with her. you know, and also you can hear, because it was less noisy, you could hear the ward manager going round to different bays and saying, how is everybody this morning? You know, you could hear the nurses going round after the ward round and doing a quick check-in with the patient, saying, did you understand everything? So it was very different. It seemed to be focused on the amount of extra time they seem to have in terms of, you know, maybe. So, you know, I have to be careful here, because I don't want you to think that for 1 minute I think that we shouldn't have visitors. You know, my mum passed away during this pandemic, and we never got to be with her because we weren't allowed to be visitors in another trust, right? So I know what that feels like. So visitors are really, really important, but I just feel there's an opportunity maybe this time to think about how we do that going forward. You know, we have a duty of care, don't we, to patients, that, you know, we need to protect their dignity, we need to ensure they rest. So, you know, whose decision is that, you know?
Thank you. I've got a few people. I've got Bill Tunnicliffe. Bill.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Siobhan, for what is a wonderful story, and I'm so glad you're better and that you have proper care taken of you. There were a couple of comments, really. One was just the observation that decompressing our hospital in this way has such enormous quality benefits in terms of patient experience, and we just need to hang on to that as a thought as we move forward. I think the second is what you've just returned to, which is about visiting and managing contact with families. Could I ask whether the ward managed that as well? Was the proactive contact with your family to inform them that you were in an inpatient, and was that facilitated in terms of being able to communicate with you? Again, you're a wonderful, articulate, lovely professional patient, but others may not be quite that, and I just wondered whether we were supporting other patients in making sure they had the contact they wished.
Okay, so at the time, the family liaison service wasn't in place. That's a new service that we have put in place for complex patients, where, you know, they will actively go to the ward and identify patients with communication issues and, you know, sort of connect them with their families. I mean, I was in a 4-bedded area and was, you know, encouraged not to leave that area, so I can only comment on the 4 sort of patients that I was with. The lady opposite me, absolutely. They were calls that happened every day at a certain time, 2 times a day, and staff came in and made sure that phone was charged, made sure the phone was ready. You know, the lady, you know, for myself and the patient next to me, we were able to communicate out very easily to our families, because we have smartphone. The Wi-Fi was excellent on the ward. You know, so had full connectivity to our families, and you know, I think communication felt better, because when you did phone out to your family, you could actually get the staff to be, you know, to speak to your family when you were there. So I was trying to explain something about diverticular disease, and I didn't know what I was talking about. I hadn't got it quite right, and the nurse actually did take over and sort of explain to my husband what was going on, so, you know, face to face through my phone. So that was wonderful. So I think there was a lot of proactivity in supporting patients and actually getting involved with patients with their updates and communications outside.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Siobhan. I've got Colin, and then if Vicky could kind of round this up, that would be great. Colin.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Siobhan. I echo my colleagues' comments. It's a super story. I noticed, particularly early part of your discussion with us, you mentioned the word calm a number of times, and my question is really for executive colleagues. How can we bottle that? How can we, when things get back to normal, ensure that we continue that sense of calm amongst our people?
Okay, Vicky, do you want to have a go at that? Vicky, are you there?
I was just outlining, Colin, that's a really helpful point, because I think for me the reflections when I was discussing Siobhan's experience with her earlier in the week, that actually that rest and the therapeutic environment from which patients can benefit is absolutely massive. And we've often been hit with national campaigns. John's campaign is one of those, where actually carers of patients who have dementia being able to have open access to ward environments, and there absolutely are the right times for that to be in place. But actually we have discussed as senior nursing team the wider sort of opening up visiting, so there's not restricted visiting, but I think this story amplifies the benefit of patients having plenty of rest and being able to have the peace and quiet that they need to be able to recover. And I think we've got to find a fine balance between that. And I think some of the positives that we've heard out of Siobhan's story, Colin, to your point, is that we need to find a fine balance between not going back to just instant high activity on the ward and patients not having, because I think what you described, Siobhan, is picked up in the observations of care that we undertake on the wards, where actually what you heard was less, just in terms of frenetic activity, footsteps, and that just quieter environment. And we have to try and create that whilst we will be moving back to more normal business. And I think we've got to find a fine balance and try and find some actions so we can deploy that so that patients do get peace and quiet. And that's really important for that therapeutic and healing environment. Siobhan, did you come back on that comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's a fine balance in there, person-centered care, but at the same time, do we always know what's best for us? So, I have a good comparison in being a patient 12 months ago, when visiting was open and I just had a heart attack, and I know I came out of this hospital exhausted from everybody wanting to come and see me because I'd had a heart attack and felt that they knew best and that they must turn up en masse. And this time they weren't allowed to come, and I did need to rest, and my dignity needed to be protected, and I got exactly what I needed. So it's that balance, isn't it?
Yeah. So a lot to learn and reflect on, David, I think, in summary.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, thanks a lot for that, Siobhan. It was really, good of you to come and explain this to us. And I know it's not straightforward, given the thousands of people on YouTube who will be watching this as you go through. But genuinely, thank you. I think there are 3 or 4 things that I take out of this, and I think there is something for. Certainly, we would ask Matthew and Vicky and the executive to reflect on. The first one is the whole issue of the front end and about this 111 change, and whether we're getting the right publicity, the right connection with our population to help them understand what we're trying to do here, and perhaps at the same time just thinking more carefully about the way we respond to people who book the system or move through it. So that's one thing, it seems to me. The second thing is around visiting generally, and I think you make some really interesting points there, and they are slightly counter to a lot of what's happened. Now, the opportunity we have now with, hopefully, and we'll talk about this later, with the recovery and the changes that are going to the reduction in COVID activity, it does give us the opportunity to restart visiting in whatever, in a different way if we think that's appropriate. So this is a really opportunity, I think, for us to think that through, and an opportunity, I think, to put energy into our engagement arrangements with patients and the public about how we might do that. So that's the second area I'd like the executive to take away. And then the third one, that we didn't tackle it, I don't think, in the conversation, is the whole issue about post-discharge and what was happening there. And I think it'd be useful to understand and know what it was that have created that. Because in a sense, the hard work's been done. You've got a patient who's satisfied and happy, and then at the end bit, we kind of get it administratively wrong. And I just think that's worth having a thought about as well. But thanks for that. I mean, in lots of ways, it's very encouraging, I think, for the board to hear some of that stuff. That we are making progress and that things are improving across the system as a whole. And again, thank you, Siobhan, for in such an articulate way for helping us understand it better. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's move on then to items of any other business. Is there any other business that people want to raise? No. Okay. Declarations of interest. All declarations of interest are on the website for people who want to see them. Let's go on to the minutes of the previous meeting for the 14th of January. Are they a reasonable reflection of what we talked about? Yes, I'll take Mark's thumbs up as acknowledgement and recognition. We've approved that. The action log. Martin, do you want to say anything about that?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that there were 2 actions emanating from a patient story in November, which are going to be considered at the next meeting, and the 3rd action has been completed.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on then now to the Chief Executive report. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody.
Sorry, just before I get, there is the Chairman's report. I have nothing constructive to say, so we'll move straight on to the Chief Executive's report.
Thank you, Chair. That's a great introduction. So, as you rightly said at the beginning of the meeting, first up, I want to also pay tribute to Peter, who died with us only now a few days ago, really. And as colleagues know, Peter was chair of our Worcestershire Health Watch for 8 years. I saw Peter most recently, actually, only a couple of weeks ago at the public board meeting where he attended for a short period of time. And obviously, we know Joe Ringsdale is on the call, joining us this morning. I suppose my reflection, having worked with Peter for 2 years and worked with a number of chairs of Health Watch in various different parts of the country, is that Peter's emotional intelligence, I think, really shone through in the way in which he interacted with members of our team. It wouldn't be unusual for Peter and Simon jointly, Simon the Chief Executive, to make contact with me to have an off-the-record conversation about something that they were concerned with, and I think whilst Health Watch's role obviously is to make sure that representing the public's concerns and making sure that we continue to improve the quality of service that we provide, it was so very helpful for the way in which Peter interacted with us, the way he challenged us but was supportive. And also made sure that if there were rumblings in the community about any particular issues, that he briefed me and made sure that I was aware of that. And I'll be forever grateful, and I'll really miss that approach, which I hope will be able to continue going forward in his absence. So personally, I want to pay tribute to him, and I know that we've been in contact with his family, and I'm sure we will provide support to Peter's wife during this difficult time. In terms of my report, Chair, I think the other points I want to just draw out, and to some extent we've reflected a little bit on that during Siobhan's patient story, is the way in which our staff are continuing to step up to the challenges that across the NHS we're responding to, whether that's in the way in which we've delivered the vaccination programme from the Alex Hospital Hub, which has now been stood down, and the teams there involved in that being just phenomenal in their flexibility in the way in which they've worked. But also my report, Chair, just reflects on some feedback from, particularly through Vicky and her nursing staff, is a growing sense of perhaps deflection and frustration and anger amongst some of the people that we're serving through our hospitals, and some behaviours I think are increasingly becoming difficult for our staff, which I think, as I reflect on my report, means that we need to redouble our efforts in supporting particularly our frontline staff who are really trying to do their best in caring for people, and the nature of COVID means that often patients deteriorate extremely quickly, and I think that has its own impact on the staff, as well as clearly the impact on relatives and loved ones. So I'm sure we'll reflect on that during the meeting, but we continue to focus on putting things in place to support our staff, and make sure they're able to be the best they can be during this time. And then the final thing, just to note, Chair, which I think is noteworthy, is a recent letter from the Director of Nursing and Commissioning from the West Midlands Ambulance Service, thanking us and our system colleagues for the work that, with the improvement work that we've done to reduce ambulance handover delays. Whilst we are absolutely relentless in our focus at eradicating 1 hour ambulance handover delays, the numbers have been significantly better. But as you'd expect, I expect them to be zero, and that's our continuing focus across the system with system partners and our internal teams. So I'll pause there, Chair, and I'm very happy to take any questions on anything in report.
Thanks, Matthew. Any questions, comments people want to make about all of that? Sharon, where are you? There you are.
I'm here. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Matthew, for your report. It's always a concern for me when you hear about, the abuse that takes place to staff, and I think that the comms here has been exceptional from what I've seen. I just have a question about whether we're doing any collective messaging with other stakeholders to get the messages out there, particularly around abuse as well to staff, and also the COVID messages. Are we working with other stakeholders to get those messages across jointly?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I mean, Richard may want to comment in terms of joined up communications across the system. I mean, certainly we tend to use various routes into messaging and communicating with stakeholders, and also asking those perhaps local councillors and MPs to advocate on our behalf as well, which, as my report says, we've been interacting very regularly with local councillors and MPs and asking them to advocate in ways in which will support some key messages out to the people of the county and further afield. But I think there's always probably more that we can do to be joined up in our communications across the county, which increasingly, in light of today's restructuring announcement by the government, the place-based focus of the county, I think, is something that I'd be wanting us to strengthen our joined-up communications around things such as abuse of staff, or indeed other messages that are key around public health and COVID compliance. I don't know whether, Richard, you wanted to add anything further to what I've done in answer to Sharon's question.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. As you say, we work very closely with comms colleagues in the CCG and the Health and Care Trust and the local authority through the whole of the pandemic, really, both in terms of the COVID response and in the vaccination campaign. And I think particularly as we move into the recovery phase, and we're moving the discussion onto that a little bit later, that we engage as a system with patients and the public and with our stakeholders to take kind of one story about how health and care services are going to have to change and adapt to meet the needs of the local communities in the post-COVID era. But we've got good, in fairness, we've got good working relationships with my opposite numbers at all our system partners. We work very effectively together. There's a system-wide ICS comms and engagement lead. So we meet virtually currently, but previously in real life, every other week to discuss joined-up campaigns and joined-up comms. And the information sharing is very good. As Matthew said, there is always more we can do. Certainly reaching out into more diverse audiences and making sure that we get the seldom heard voices front and centre when we're discussing about the future plans for the way services are developed and delivered. But I think in terms of organisational relationships and a joined-up approach, we have been recognised as making very good progress over the last couple of years.
Watkar.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just first of all congratulate Matthew. The letter that's been received by from the West Midlands Ambulance Service, highlighting the fact that the staff are working extremely hard in terms of ensuring that the patient are handed over in a timely manner, and to have a recognition from West Midlands Ambulance Service is something which is very welcome. So congratulations to your staff at the hospital. You mentioned in your report about psychological impact and also psychological impact on staff, but also the Wellbeing Wednesday initiative. Can I just ask, in terms of the impact that COVID is having on our staff, where are we in terms of developing a comprehensive staff restoration, rehabilitation or recovery plan, and where are we in terms of implementing that kind of plan?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think as the COVID incident response has gone on for 12 months now, we've increased our offer to staff and the support available month by month, really. So it's been responsive to the emerging needs and the emerging developments within the pandemic. And as an executive team, we've been consistently sort of sitting back and saying, are we doing enough, and are we responding to the emerging needs of staff? I don't know whether, Tina, you want to sort of give a sense of summary of where we are in terms of that offer, because it's pretty comprehensive, Wacko, actually. And have we got a plan for the future in terms of restoration? Not yet, but we're certainly having those conversations now about what our current arrangements need to look like, and do they need to look different as we move into a different phase. And of course, we're in that period where we're not quite out of wave 2's business in terms of large numbers of patients in the trust. Our staff are pretty tired. So it's this kind of situation is starting to enter a transition period where I think we'll need to look to the future. So Tina, I don't know whether you want to add anything to those points.
Yeah, so I think the issue is we have got a very comprehensive offer for staff, which we've pulled together into an infographics, which will be widely publicised going forward. The key is, though, to keep reminding staff of the offer, because even now people don't realise what they can access. So that's, for me, a really comprehensive communication and engagement plan to support the wellbeing offer. And then we've also prioritised in 3 areas as we come out, hopefully, of this last wave. So one is to how we truly recognise our colleagues for what they've been through over the last 12 months, and that genuine, recognition. How we can retain them. So, people may want to take extended breaks. They may want to work in a different environment to what they have in the last year. They may want to retire and return, etc. It's coming up with a range of options for them to take that time out, or have a refresh, if you like. And then the third piece is around, to me, more of the wellness initially, as opposed to the health and wellbeing, which is the longer term strategy. So wellness is what can we do every day to maintain our own wellness, be it from a mental health or physical health perspective. So that's the immediate strategy that we're taking for our staff offer.
Okay, Bill, I think you want to chime in here. Bill?
Thank you, Dave. Sorry, I was muted. Could I just come back on this issue about staff support in the recovery phase? I just wanted to congratulate the executive and Tina for what I think are very good and comprehensive local plans. As a frontline clinician now, I'm more concerned that nationally we don't have the right approach to supporting our staff. I reflected with Tina just yesterday that to think that our frontline staff are putting their lives on the line and working incredibly hard, yet some of them are still needing to use food banks to feed their families, I think is a national disgrace. And while we can do everything we can locally, I think as an organisation we should be really pushing the need for proper national recognition of our nursing workforce to ensure that they're adequately rewarded in terms of pay, in terms of job retention, in terms of development. And I think this trust, this organisation is doing a great deal to help locally, but I think we need to make even stronger representation nationally.
Okay. Any other points? Sorry. Yeah. Any other points before I just kind of move on? I think some really good points there. I think the way we've learned some lessons in terms of communication around all of this. There is a local engagement group that I sit on, which has the senior councillors from the county council and all the leaders of the district councils on it, and a whole range of stakeholders, which has been a very effective way of taking messages and information around Worcestershire. I think it's been, phenomenal, and they've had a significant investment in communications people to enable that to happen. And I think we can continue to learn those lessons as we go forward. In terms of the recovery stroke restoration or whatever, I think Bill is absolutely right here. We need there needs to be a national response to all of this, in relation to terms and conditions and annual leave and a whole series of things that need to be dealt with at a national level. We've got plenty of words, but we need a national framework to do it. Having said all of that, there is still more that we can do locally, and I recognise the frustration sometimes about the amount that's available, but how little sometimes the staff know about it. And we'll never, we have to continue to communicate properly with people to enable that to happen. However, I think what's going to happen soon is we're going to be presented as a board with a whole series of plans in relation to the restoration and recovery, and a really important element of that will be the way in which we support our staff through the recovery. If you think about the way we've got a whole backlog of patients, a huge kind of mountain of healthcare need out there for us to deal with. In lots of ways it could be very daunting for our staff. We need to kind of get ourselves organised properly, and that would mean, the use of Kidderminster Hospital, the use of the Alex, the way in which we're going to change all of that. Really important stuff, but also what speed we're going to go at, how we're going to pace this properly so that we can give the staff the right kind of support to enable it to happen. So I think with that recovery plan, we do need a statement, a plan that supports that, which is about the recovery of the staff. So I'm sure Matthew and the team will take that on board and will produce it when they need to. Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Matthew. Can we talk about all things COVID? Paul, I think it speaks for itself in lots of ways. Are there any particular points you want to pick out?
I'll just pick up a couple of points, Chairman, because I think the paper hopefully now has been refined sufficiently that it's quite clear. I mean, I guess just a couple of points, because what we've tried to do now is provide a comparator between the first and second wave, because we have started to see some reduction in the activity that we're faced with at the moment for COVID in the second wave, but it was trying to put it in some context that we're still running way above the peak of the first wave. So I think the kind of 3 or 4 kind of headlines I would give is that in the first wave, we actually had to manage just over 760 COVID patients, and we were running with a mortality of about 32%. In this second wave, it's still continuing, but in a shorter time period than the first wave, we've actually had over 1,500 COVID patients, and the mortality has dropped to just below 24%. I think the second thing I'd make is that at the height of the first wave, the maximum number of COVID inpatients we had in our hospitals at any one time was 141. in this second wave, we have had a peak of 269, and at the time of writing the report, the number was 260. Pleasing to note that over the last 10 days, the numbers have reduced, and this morning the total number of patients who are COVID in our hospitals now stands at 175, which, as I say, is a good drop below the peak of this second wave, but still sits significantly above the peak of the first wave. In terms of our inpatient beds, we're currently running with 740 general and acute beds, and at the peak of the second wave, 46% of those beds were directed to COVID pathways. Today, that number has dropped to 36%. So out of our 740 beds, we currently have 269 that are designated for COVID pathway. And then I think the other point I'd make is that in the second wave, we had a rolling 7-day average high of new cases per day of 35. You will see in the report at the time of writing that has reduced to 27, and the rolling 7-day average from today going backwards now stands at 16. So I think the kind of overall message I would give to the board is that we do seem to be plateauing, slightly reducing the second wave now, but our COVID activity levels and beds designated for COVID are still significantly above anything we saw in the first wave. And what we're also noting is a plateauing and slowing down effect in this second wave, whereas in the first wave, after we hit the peak, the reduction was quite dramatic, and that's not happening in this second wave. So I think as a team, we feel we are currently on alert level 5, and there's nothing to indicate that we should de-escalate at this point in time. As you know, we're currently still operating out of multiple ITUs with a surge capacity in excess of 200% of our normal level for ITU. So I think overall the message is COVID-related activity is reducing, but reducing slowly and remains way above anything we managed and saw in the first wave. Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions, comments people want to make about it? Colin.
Thanks, Chair. Paul, I'm inviting you to get your crystal ball out. You said that we're plateauing at the moment, but I wondered if you have any view on when you can reasonably confidently expect the rate of decline to increase, and I guess associated with that, what the impact of vaccination is going to be, and is it going to change the age profile of patients who are coming here?
So at the moment, in terms of the latter point, there's not a significant variance in the age profile at the moment, but we probably wouldn't expect to see that until towards the end of February. In terms of crystal ball, I'm sure I'll regret saying this, but our kind of view at the moment is that we felt that we would hit a peak. You know, we call it the last board meeting, I said around the 23rd, 24th of January, and that seems to be when we hit the peak. So I think that was a reasonable assessment of what we were facing. Our view at the moment is a combination of the vaccine and what we're seeing in terms of community prevalence. We'll see a slow downward trend through to the end of February, and then we're expecting in March to see that reduction in the rate of reduction increase, and we expect by about the 1st week of March. So somewhere around about 7th, 8th, we're predicting that we would be at a level that is equivalent to the peak of the first wave. And then in terms of Matthew and the chairman have touched on the restoration, we're kind of working on the basis that we will be, in terms of starting to move our services around, thinking towards the latter part of March, when we will be able to pick up that level of activity. Then we are gradually increasing our particularly cancer surgery on the Worcester site, which we have been doing over the last 2 weeks.
Okay, thanks. I've got Mark Yates, Anita and Wakar. Mark.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Colin asked the exact question I was about crystal ball gazing, so thank you.
Okay, Anita.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, you mentioned, and thank you for the update. You mentioned that the mortality profile had changed between the first wave and the second wave. I was wondering about long COVID. Are there any indications about whether, sort of two-part question, are there any indications that we're getting more or less long COVID out of the second, out of those people that are being infected now? And secondly, what impact are those patients from the first wave who did get long COVID, what extent are they putting pressure on our resources and services? Because I'm guessing that the longer we go through, the more we're going to have these sort of ongoing problems.
Before I come in, I think Mike might want to temper my response.
Yes, Mike, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Yeah, so we've got a project with the CCG to deliver long COVID support in the community. At the moment, there are two components that are impacting on us as an organisation. There's the post-COVID fibrosis patients, and the respiratory team have been seeing those when they had the capacity. Clearly they don't at the moment, and I think they will impact on us going forward. My concern is I don't know that we've got any treatment for it. So the plan at the moment is that we will look to develop a community pulmonary rehabilitation program to support them as far as they can. We've been fortunate in identifying a retired consultant rheumatologist who's going to provide a community-based long COVID service to try and sift things out, and a very CNS-based program of support to try and keep those patients in the community. I think there is an unmet need out there at the moment because that's all being developed and it isn't there. What I don't think any of us know is there a difference in the long COVID between the two waves? Because really it's only October, and by definition you've got to have it for months. So we'll know that probably by this time next year, but at the moment I think we don't have clarity on that. I think it will burn a lot of resource, but our view and the view of the CCG is we need to keep that in the community as much as possible, because there's a lot of psychological support, probably quite a lot of social support in terms of consequent unemployment and social deprivation that we've got to activate. But I don't think, and Bill might have a view on this as a respiratory physician, we're going to be able to impact on what's established fibrosis as a consequence of the thrombotic events that COVID produces. So that's the plan at the moment.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
I think the only thing I'd add to that Mike said, I think Mike would agree, is that in terms of the other part of Anita's question, we're not seeing any prevalence of long COVID within the hospital.
Okay, thank you. Can we, Wakar?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for your report. You've got the age and gender profile for inpatients and crude mortality. Do you have the ethnic profile at all for the inpatients and crude mortality?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do, and we've been working on how best to present that. That will be in the next board report, which will include that profile. In terms of, just to give a kind of advanced indication, that what we're seeing at the moment is that the presentation of COVID patients as inpatients to the hospital by ethnic group is not at variance with the demographic profile of the population. And then when we look at the mortality levels, then again there is no variance between the population demographic and there is no variance between the admission demographic and the mortality demographic. But I'll provide far more explicit details of that in the report that will come to the board in February. If you want to see it in advance, or board members want to see in advance, I could happily share the amended report to colleagues this week, if you just wanted to get a view of what it looks like. But there is no variance to the population demographic.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Let's move on. Thanks for that, Paul. I mean, activity. I mean, two or three things I take out of Paul's report. The first one is that although it's coming down, it's still at higher levels than it was at the peak of wave 1. So it's a bit early to declare success in all of this, and we need to be really vigilant, and we need to really reinforce the social distancing, hand washing, all those sorts of things that we know, mask wearing, which will make a difference, and it kind of gets us to accelerate our commitment to getting the vaccination program done. But the staff, continue to work remarkably well. It's really quite humbling to work with a group of people who are prepared to work in the way that they are for their patients, and I'm sure the thanks to the whole board would go out to them for their continuing work. Let's then move on to the paper on the update on ICS and Trust Action Plan on the day, I think, which the new white paper has been published. So, Jo.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just on that very point, I think from what we've seen so far, clearly the white paper builds on the work we've been doing already and speeds up the integration of health and care at a local level, replacing competition with collaboration, and also looking at trying to reform some of the burdensome governance structures that we have. It does appear to be slightly a bit more wide-ranging, so there might be new powers to Secretary of State, some transfer of powers from ALBs, and also some possible potential to intervene at local reconfigurations. But we will wait and see. We understand there's going to be a letter published today, but just in terms of bringing up to date, that's our understanding so far. So the paper before you is really just to update you on the wide developments with the ICS, and I shall take the paper as read, but just to focus on a couple of areas. We've been identified as potentially one of 7 ICSs nationally that will take a lead in terms of developing some of the themes as we go through, which I think provides us with an opportunity to both be in at the beginning to see how things might develop, but clearly that also reflects the approach from the region in terms of where they think we have got to date in terms of our development. You'll also note that from a regional commissioning perspective, there's a lot of work going on to see how the actual roles of specialist commissioning and the networks would be deployed into the ICS versus the split between the east and the west of the Midlands and East regions. I've been offered a place, or nominated to sit on a tiering group to try and identify where those things should sit, so hopefully we'll be able to have an eye in and represent the voice of the district general hospitals, which obviously we're a large one of those. And just moving on then, the mental health collaborative are probably going to go first in terms of looking at how we apply in a practical way the ICS in terms of pooling of resource, and that's likely to happen early into the next financial year. So the second part of the paper just responds to the board development session we had at the back end of last year, looking at how we work with the ICS to produce an 8-point action plan. And I don't propose to go through some detail. You'll see there's a slide deck attached as an appendix, but you can see that very much this focuses on our putting patient first agenda, but also the roles that various members of the exec have in terms of leading on the system workforce transformation, the use of resources, the importance of clinical engagement, and we're also going to be taking a lead role in terms of developing planned care pathways as well. So some of the details in there, and happy to take questions, but otherwise we're just asking for you to endorse that direction of travel. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any questions, comments? Anita?
Thank you, Chair. Joe, are we as a trust, in your view, are we, I'm trying to think of the best way of putting this. So I think there's some really good progress here, and I do like the paper. I suppose the thing that's missing for me is, as a trust board, are we recognising that we're going to have to work differently in order to be an effective player/leader in the system? And I think, for example, in things like audit and assurance, as chair of the committee, I've actually already started now interlocking with the chairs of Y Valley and Health and Care and the CCG, and we're starting to talk about, are there some ways in which we can start to think about managing system risk? And I kind of wonder whether that's the sort of thing that either is happening or should be happening across other aspects of our operations and directorates. Thanks.
Yeah. No, I think that this is many multifactorial, isn't it? Both in terms of functions, areas, and services, and when you think as a system. So we're looking at it in a couple of levels. One is also clearly the engagement and winning the hearts and minds, and I think that really plays to trying to develop what the culture for the ICS needs to look like. And that's a piece of work that the new programme director, Dave Mahaffey, I know has got a line of sight on, being informed by the director of strategy, that unless we do that, we're not really going to be able to get to some of that blended approach that we need as system partners. Some of this as well is actually achieved by experience, so that's why we're thinking about actually some practical pathways we can work on together and help lead some of that thinking. And I think as much as we, as acute members of the system, need to understand better our other partners' work, and particularly that very close to communities, there's also something about they need to understand the implications of some of the work they're doing and how it affects us. So that's why we want to take this life course partnership approach. I think the risk for us is clearly our capacity to engage, particularly at the moment with the level 5 surge, and the senior clinical teams understand the need, and we're having those ongoing dialogue, but actually how we then cascade that through into the whole trust is going to be a challenge, but one we'll need to meet.
Okay, thanks. I've got Mark, Colin and Wakar. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just to respond to a couple of points that Anita made there, the last, as the trust representative sitting on the ICS executive, the last executive meeting received a paper suggesting that NEDs and lay members from the provider trust and the CCG should come far closer together, so becoming more sort of system working. That was accepted by the executive forum, but hasn't sort of commenced as yet for obvious reasons within pandemic. But that's probably going to be the catalyst to decide on how we get closer, and whether that's, as you suggested, through audit committees or other methods. Who knows where it will go? But it is up and running. And if I may, Chair, reflect on where this trust was, let's say, 4 years ago in terms of the ICS and the engagement. I would congratulate Joe and the executive colleagues and the clinical colleagues as to how far we've come in that engagement now, and we are as a trust right in the middle of the ICS in terms of that engagement, where that certainly wasn't the case previously. So I would congratulate how we've done that and be far more open. I would suggest that maybe 4 years ago the Acute Trust wasn't seen as a particularly good partner because it had its particular problems at the time. Let's be honest. Whereas now I think it's far more accepted as a good partner and a meaningful partner that can be part of driving things forward. That engagement will start looking at risks across the system, I'm almost sure. And the other point that I need to make, which is a good one, working differently. I think we are working differently more now. We're going in that direction of working differently. And I know Jo is at the forefront of that, and I would thank her for that work. But we will continue to morph and change to accommodate working. And even though we are in a most difficult phase, especially for our clinicians, I still do think it's really important that we do everything we can to engage in that ICS work, because it really is what's going to be our future. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back on Mark's point, because I think we're really good. I think the thing that sort of was in my mind, we've had, say for example, the audit and assurance chairs, we've had one meeting, and I have to say at one point in the meeting, which was a very pleasant meeting, at one point I absolutely bristled at a throwaway remark from the audit chair of the Health and Care Trust, and I realised how little understanding there is of the realities of the individual sort of players in the system. So I completely endorse Joe's view. I think that idea about we need to understand each other better in order to forge that common culture. So I completely agree with the sort of the line of travel. As I say, it brought me up sharply because I suddenly realised just how embedded some of those misconceptions are. And so I'm sure we are, but I just want us to try and make sure we don't forget about it in the weeks to come. Thanks.
Okay, Colin.
Thanks, Chair. Joe, in the 8-point plan, we've got one that relates to optimising the power of digital across providers and particularly emphasising population health management. Absolutely the right thing to do for us, but it looks to me as a fairly ambitious timetable. So I wondered your view on just how ready we are to take on that challenge.
So Rebecca may want to come in on this one as well. So I think we recognise that actually in terms of ambition, a lot of what we're going to do in terms of the integration agenda, and if you look at the evidence base and you look at places where they've done this in the States, for example, and Spain and other places, it's very dependent on your data. And very dependent on the insights that you can get from that, and population health management is clearly, an important driver there. So we're having to do some catch up as a system in terms of creating that system-wide data lake and the framework that will allow us the platform to do the really fantastic stuff. However, there is insight we're able to get at the moment, population health management, which is driven in part by the public health colleagues at the PCN level, where they've been able to build some understanding there. The trick here is actually we need both, and that's where the place as Worcestershire becomes really material and important, because actually, again, it's not just looking at what's happening right on the front line in the small communities, but it's understanding actually the impact of where patients are moving around the system to identify those gaps and smooth the pathways in terms of how we move towards more of a preventative agenda. So I'll let Rebecca come in. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Rebecca, from a sort of a technical perspective.
Yeah, no, I agree, Joe, with what you're saying, which is we need to make a start on this, and it doesn't need to be perfect immediately. We've got sort of the bigger picture things like the data lake and moving towards whole place population health management. In the meantime, we can focus on particular pathways, and we can focus on some of the good work we've been doing actually through COVID with some of our partners, in particular public health, around population health management as well.
Okay, thanks. Wakar.
Thank you, Chair. Joe, I was really pleased to hear you were talking earlier about engagement and winning hearts and minds, and it's really important to understand communities. Just on the 8-point plan, and this was discussed at the board development session in December 2020 when I wasn't a NED. Where does it place importance in the 8-point plan in terms of engagement? Because clearly this is, a really key issue, but I just don't seem to see it in the 8-point plan.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the way this has come from WACCAR, we were doing our board development session to think about our role as a trust and how we play into the broader ICS system development plan, which I'm happy to take you through the detail of. So there's engagement, our role, but also what the wider system is doing. But I think if you look in the first two objectives, one of them talks about the behaviours. And so this is thinking about the culture and actually our role in terms of how we can be a player in the wider system space, and also engagement is part of that. And the second one, which talks about the workforce transformation NOD agenda, the 2.2, that does talk about our internal comms and engagement strategy for staff. And Richard sits on the STP engagement group. And I don't know, Richard, whether you wanted to comment about progress or any activity that's going on there currently.
Yeah, so thanks, Joe. There is an STP-wide comms and engagement plan, WACCAR, which dates back to 2018. It was due for an update late last year, but obviously that's been put on pause for COVID. But the work to update and refresh that will be starting very shortly. So I'm happy to share the previous draft with you and welcome your views.
Okay, thanks. I've got, finally, I think I've got Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of comments to build on Joe's paper, and perhaps to answer a couple of points that non-exec colleagues have raised. I think the first one is the capacity question. I think in terms of leadership capacity, and I think it's important that the board notes that a number of our executive directors are leading elements of work in the integrated care system development. So Tina is the lead HR director and is increasingly influencing the direction for both workforce strategy and organisational development, and inevitably the way in which culture and behaviours develop across the integrated care system will be informed by the work that Tina is leading, which is very much based on our 11-point approach that Tina's developed for us internally. I think the second point to note is Paul is also leading the development of elective planned care and building on the work during COVID, where our clinical directors and divisional directors working very closely with GP leaders, and I think that is the foundation for developing really quite coherent pathways for planned and services for patients referred by GPs. And likewise, Mike is also playing an important leadership role in that regard. And then, not forgetting the money, Robert Toole is leading the development of system-wide efficiency and productivity development, so that we can start to really look at the way in which the Worcestershire pound is used most effectively. And I suppose the point of raising that, Chair, is also to note that in looking forward into next year's financial year, the development of our priorities as an organisation, we met yesterday as an executive team to really think about what should be the priorities, and a lot of the discussion was based around this 8-point plan that Joe has put together, because we increasingly are seeing the role that we need to play as an executive leadership team being a system leadership role. And I think the final point to note, Chair, is in response to Anita's point about system-wide behaviours. Board members hopefully will be pleased to hear that one of the key behaviours in our executive team behaviour list, if you like, is that we act as ambassadors for all system partners in everything we discuss outside and internally in the organisation. And I think that is an important precursor to the right kind of culture across the integrated care system, and I hope that we can encourage all organisations to adopt that type of approach, where we promote and encourage and challenge each other as opposed to perhaps make perhaps unhelpful comments in meetings that upset or distract from the key agenda, which is actually putting patients first and delivering better outcomes for the people of Worcestershire.
Okay, thanks, Matthew, for that. I mean, what I would say on all of this is that I think we are making progress. I think the action plan is a good one. It will be uneven, and actually I think it's going to get quite difficult. And I was interested in Anita's comments there, really, because one of the experiences we had with the finance subcommittee was that people at one level were very collaborative and worked together, and we all were in partnership until it got to a real issue. And then suddenly people leapt back into their segments. And there will be some of this as we go along. And we just have to work through it. And, you know, we need to confront some of these issues because they are important and they need confronting. But they need to be done in a context which I think people want to broadly work in the right direction. I think increasingly people do. And it shows by what's happening in terms of emergency care, in the treatment of COVID, vaccinations, all of these practical things. We can see the system working much better together. So thanks for that. Thanks for that, Joe. We note the update and we support the action plan. Thank you. Let's then move on to annual planning 21-22.
So thank you again, Chair. And ordinarily this time of year we'd be wanting to bring to you very finely worked up plans as we are sort of heading towards the turn of one financial year into the next. But clearly, given the situation we're in with level 5, then we've had to suspend some of the planning process. So the purpose of the paper is really just to give you some assurance in terms of the approaches that have been taken to date. And the work that's been going on in the background in preparation for as we come out of this current surge. And you'll see as you read through the paper that we have been working closely both from the finance teams but also the strategy and planning teams with our colleagues across the system to ensure there is consistency. We're anticipating at this point that guidance will be issued probably around mid-March. But there's a clear intent that in effect we're going to roll over the planning process by a quarter. So the planning for 21-22 will effectively be from quarter 2 to quarter 4, and then looking at a longer term picture beyond that, and we shall await to see the details in the guidance. From a financial perspective then you'll see that there has been very much a top-down approach to providing a regional submission, taking into account some of the challenges from this year, the underlying post-COVID position, and also some of those non-recurrent costs that might roll through to 21-22, and trying to work out how we bridge some of the outturn from last year through to this year and beyond. But I'll let Robert come in if he wants to come in with any additional position statement, but otherwise happy to take questions, Chair.
Okay, fine. Robert?
Yeah, I think it's also just picking up on this, Chairman, that we do need to have a budget from the 1st of April that we're working to, despite planning moving through to the first quarter. So the teams are still working in the background, you know, and linking in where possible with the divisional departments. So we will have a draft of, you know, we've already got the post-COVID exit run rates that we're looking at from this year, bridging it back to last year's plan. We need to make sure we do a proper cost impact of all the business cases that we've agreed in 2020, 2021, looking at the staff, you know, PEP schemes that we did, as well as looking at recurrent COVID costs into next year, because we know some of the costs aren't one-offs, they will continue, particularly around testing, particularly labs and our pathology teams. And we're also making sure we've got divisional input into identification of cost pressures. So we are setting a plan moving forward, at least so that we've got something that we can measure ourselves against. I think that's just an important part while we wait for the financial framework, which will particularly be focused on the system income, I believe. So that's what we need to be looking at.
Okay, thanks. Any questions about all of that? I mean, it's all deeply unsatisfactory, isn't it? That we're kind of here and that we really don't know the money we've got for next year or whatever, and we have to do the best that we can in those circumstances. And the two things that it seems to me are vital in all of this is, one, that we get a proper budget out so we can measure people's performance against it, and secondly, we continue with our process of reducing the base costs of our organisation, because no matter where you cut it in future, the pressure on us, quite rightly, to be as efficient as we possibly can is going to continue. So none of that work is wasted to keep get costs out of our system as we go forward. Okay, well, people are working in difficult circumstances and all this. I understand it, but I think get a budget out, Robert, and get a great big cost improvement program sorted, and we'll be, content that we're taking the right direction. Thank you. Okay, let's then move on to the. We know that. Let's move on then to the integrated performance report. I am conscious of time, and I don't want to keep people here. I mean, because I do want to spend a bit of time on maternity, because it seems to me maternity is an important issue for us to tackle. My guess is that most of the things in the performance report the subcommittees have seen and we've dealt with. So, are there anything particularly you want to raise to our attention here, Matthew, before I open it up to questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I think we've got a slightly longer list of things on the integrated performance report, and obviously we do inevitably want to be focusing in on the board assurance framework risks, particularly for us. We've talked already about COVID. The long waiting patients, I think we've already, as Paul alluded to, started now planning in earnest for how we're going to deal with essentially what represents a waiting list that's grown by a third over the course of the year of COVID incident response. I think we should take the maternity separately. I think the two we should spend a bit of time on really are infection prevention and control, and a couple of the risks around staffing. And if there are any questions on finance, I'm sure colleagues will pick those up. So perhaps a quick brief overview of infection control, Vicky, and then to Tina for people indicators, Chair, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's cool.
I think just to comment really in terms of infection control, it's taken extraordinary actions from everybody to manage the risks for our patients and keep them safe. And we make reference throughout the papers, I think in Paul's paper, and we've previously commented at the board about our actions in January, which was to move to 2 COVID pathways, which has been described and discussed in the committees. And that was important because we needed to balance the risk to patients at the front door in terms of our ED, and then manage them safely through the pathways. But despite all of those actions, we've had 26 outbreaks in total in terms of patients who we monitor closely in terms of undertaking the long flow test at the front door and the more detailed swabbing, and then through at day 3, day 5 and day 13. And so we have a range of probable and definite cases, and of those then we look at how we've managed those patients. So we have to monitor for each outbreak where it's definite cases and probable. We have to manage and monitor those for 28 days. So that's quite a complex list of both outbreaks and monitoring that needs to go on, and we're very grateful for the expertise of Tracy Cooper as the DIPSI, who's been leading that work with the microbiologists and obviously clinicians involved. Of those outbreaks, 11 have now closed, and I know that certainly the liaison in terms of those outbreaks with our PHE colleagues and our CCG colleagues have been involved with each of the lessons learned from those processes, but importantly they haven't been able to, our external partners, been able to add anything that we should have been doing over and above the actions that we've been taking, which is pleasing to see. And I think the input from clinicians in terms of adherence to infection control practice has really supported those actions. Importantly, over and above the infection control, what we have been monitoring is obviously the amount of patient movement. So we've been evaluating the move from 3 COVID pathways, as in green, amber and red, to COVID or non-COVID, with that patient movement, and we've seen a reduction in our patient movement, which has been pleasing to see, but we continue to monitor and report through our command and control processes in terms of infection control. So that's particularly around COVID. I think the comment in the integrated performance report in relation to our statutory reporting is as reported there, but I'm happy to pick up any questions on those issues.
Thanks. Tina?
So from a workforce perspective, we are seeing the impact of the level 5 escalation on appraisals and job plans in particular. So we're seeing some deterioration in compliance levels for those, but have maintained good compliance with our mandatory training throughout this period, which is positive. We've also continued to improve on our vacancy rates and staff turnover rates, and now in quartile 2 of Model Hospital, so that's good progress. And regards to staff health and wellbeing, we've achieved a 90% for our flu vaccine programme of frontline staff. And as at the 7th of February, our participation rate for the COVID vaccine was 78% for all colleagues, but only 64% for Black, Asian and minority ethnic colleagues. So we were doing some work to improve those rates, including a webinar later today to raise people an opportunity to raise questions and have some debate around that. We also sit at 94% for our occupational health risk assessment compliance and 89% of that for BAME. So we have seen improvement in those areas.
Okay. Questions? Sorry, I don't mean to put people off from speaking, but it just strikes me that this is a continuation of the last, and people know what the issues are and are getting on with them. So we shouldn't kind of, just for the sake of it, move forward. Okay, let's then move forward. Can I just go around the committee chairs to make sure there's anything that they consider need to so people and court. Mark, anything you want to bring to add?
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot of echoing going on there. The only thing I was going to add is just some good news. Tina gave the news about the general metrics, but I'd just like to recognise that in terms of job planning, our urgent care team, they've got a 100% job planning with consultants and SAS doctors. And if we link that to the letter that the WACR raised with the Chief Executive, then you can see that all the work that's going into that urgent care division to try and improve their performance across a range of things, which obviously improves their performance with our patients, is working, and the metrics are showing it. So I'd just like to congratulate them on that. But apart from that, everything else is as Tina described, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bill, anything you want to bring to our attention?
No, I think just to reinforce the excellent work that Tracy is doing with the infection prevention and control, to see the MSSA numbers coming back in line is a really encouraging step, and I'm really grateful for the hard work.
Yeah. Okay. Finance and performance, anything, Colin?
No, Chair, nothing particular to highlight except what's already in the report.
Right. Thanks. We're doing audit insurance later. Okay, let's move on then and talk about a whole set of things around governance, but particularly relating to midwifery. First of all, we'll start on the staffing report for October. Vicky.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll take the paper as read. I think what I really wanted to focus on was just Appendix 1, which, because the report focuses on October, November, but as we've been discussing, the surge in our activity for COVID seriously impacted on our staffing, and therefore Appendix 1 outlines a significant effort in terms of staffing those safely. I think we had detailed discussions at both QGC and People and Culture. So I'm just going to pick out the key points really, because I think the staffing safeguards are set out in the paper. The graphs in context on page 125 of that paper set out the surge that was particular in January. And I think the redeployment of staff and the principles of how we manage that are set out on page 126. And so I won't go through the detail, but the importance is that redeployment was managed in a very clear governance framework that was led in pods, which is based on a national process, and led by a critical care nurse with the support from either trained nurses, AHP healthcare science staff, or healthcare assistants. And I think the significance in terms of those blended staffing levels has been amazing in terms of how we've managed to work to that, and that includes where we got to our peak, which I'll come to now. Then we obviously used a range of different professions within the organisation, including medical staff, but not for the medical skills, but actually for the nursing input that we needed. And that actually talks quite a cultural change, certainly for the doctors that were involved. But the London Transformation and Learning Collaborative, which published documents in December, led us to be very clear about that model in terms of the pod and the blended staffing model. But I think the fact that, I think for the board, just to pause for a minute and recognise the significance in our normal critical care capacity, which is 12 beds, which requires 78 full-time equivalent, to then move to 32 beds at our peak around, well, as Paul said, peak at the end of January, but to surge to 32 beds as of the 14th of January for critical care. And that required 165 full-time equivalent. And to do that rapidly is significant, and I just want to place on record my thanks to all of the senior healthcare support workers, trained staff across all of the professions for their input. And in our senior COVID discussions, which we still have twice a week, we've actually looked at what on our electronic staff record is the record of the number of whole-time equivalent deployed in January, and that was 119 whole-time equivalent, and that's without counting corporate nurses who were deployed who are not currently on that electronic staff record. That's a massive whole-time equivalent that we've deployed over that period of time. So I think just want to pull out those key points. I think the rest of the PowerPoint and appendix outlines those key points, and then I'll pass to Justine in terms of the midwifery staffing one. I think the points about support to staff, which have been covered, so I won't pick those up, Chair, if that's okay, but I think there's a set out on page 130 of that report. So I'll pause there if there's any questions on the staffing specifically, and then pass to Justine.
Okay, let's move on to midwifery staffing then. Justine?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So this is a report that outlines staffing challenges that we saw in October and November, and unsurprisingly we also saw a much greater impact in the second wave than we did in the first wave. This was due to an increase in activity, but also an increase in the unavailability of our teams. So we saw midwives who were both absent for COVID and non-COVID related reasons, and we did have a small number of vacancies. So during that time we took a number of mitigations which enabled us to continue to provide safe care. However, we did notice that at times there were periods of time where women had a lesser experience than we would have wanted them to due to some delays in care, but they were safe during that period. So we've discussed these reports at a number of forums in detail, but I think just to say some of the next steps that we've taken is that we've had an incredibly good response to recent adverts for a number of posts that we had. And we've also been provided with additional posts funded to support us to offset some of that unavailability that continues within our team. So the position did improve into December, but obviously, as you've heard from some of the other speakers today, that we are still within COVID, and we're still monitoring and managing those staffing problems throughout on a month-by-month basis, with the mitigations that are outlined in the report that have proved successful. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Bill.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the report. I thought there were 3 observations I wanted to make. One was that in our integrated performance review, we saw the friends and family response rate for maternity dip quite significantly at the time of these staff difficulties. And I think that's a learning point for me, that the friends and family test may not be an indicator of friends and family satisfaction, but might be much more to do with how much time or ability the staff have to actually apply the test. So it's a bit of a learning thing for me, but I think we should use that in future as a bit of a temperature test for challenges around staffing. I noted in your report that you mentioned moving patients to Wye Valley to ensure they got timely care. I wasn't quite sure of the detail of that, but I just wondered whether we should be moving our resources to the patients from Wye Valley to here, and whether that's an approach that talks more of the ICS moving forward. So it's rather putting patients right in the middle of it, looking at resource from other areas being brought to our patients, rather than us sending our patients to other providers. And I just wondered whether that was worth a bit of a think. And then my last question was really about the 10 posts that you've recruited to. I'm very glad to hear we've recruited to those. I just wondered how much of this was anticipated. Could we have prevented the hiatus in October and November by recruiting earlier? Were we running too lean a ship in the previous 6 months? So 3 points really.
Okay, so if I just start with the first one, Bill, in terms of where we're running a too lean a ship, we have an opportunity really to recruit twice a year within maternity services at the moment, and that's when our students qualify. It's very, very difficult to get qualified midwives to move from one service to another. So we take that opportunity, and we were recruiting in September and October anyway. I think we had some unexpected consequence around COVID, particularly around people travelling, because I think some of the restrictions were lifted. People then took the opportunity to have a summer holiday, and obviously then returned with a 2-week quarantine period, and that was really evident in September, and I don't think we could have anticipated that. I think in terms of COVID, again, we had changes in the rules that consistently meant that we had some of our clinically vulnerable staff returning to work and then having to return back, to working from home, and that just, even though they're still considered to be employed and can provide some telephone support for us, they're not able to provide, face-to-face clinical care, and that then impacted as well. So I think we talked about a perfect storm within the division when we had some feedback sessions with our staff. And the 10 posts that we've recruited to are additional posts on top of some posts that we had already recruited to in September. We've recently recruited and offered posts in January, and we're recruiting again now, ready for our students that qualify in February. So we're going to go into, obviously, the spring in a very positive position.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Vicky, are you an old hand, or is it a new hand you put up?
No, it is a new hand, Chair, right. If I can just come in, because I think it was just to ask Justine just to outline, because I think it's important for the board to note that there were concerns from staff in relation to the staffing during that period of time. The division have done a significant amount of work in terms of engaging and meeting with staff, but that was after staff had expressed some concerns, or a couple of members of staff had expressed concerns to CQC in terms of our regulator. So I think it's important that we reflect that at the board, but also for Justine to set out the significant amount of work that she and the DMT have undertaken in continuing the engagement process with staff. So would that be helpful, Justine, just to outline?
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. So in September time, there were some concerns raised, and in early October, we convened 6 open meetings with staff across our 3 sites to hear their concerns about particularly around safe staffing. And what we learned from those open meetings were that most of the concerns were around working practices, the impact of some changes that was then impacted on their way of working. So, for example, if we were needing to draw on our community staff to come and support the inpatient areas, obviously then that has an impact on them and their team as well. So it was just noting and being aware of the sorts of things that were concerning our teams. And as I talked about earlier, although our staffing remained safe, we weren't providing the best experience at times, and our staff are very proud of the care that they provide for women and their families, and they don't want it not to be the best experience that women can have. And some of their feedback told us very clearly that that's what they didn't feel they were able to do. They weren't able to give that, excellent standard of care that they wanted to give all of the time, and were very concerned about some of the delays. That links into something that you said, Bill, shortly ago about women being transferred to Wye Valley for care. So we offer women at the point of booking for induction of labour the opportunity to go to Wye Valley if there are any delays experienced at Worcester. And that was the offer that was taken up. It's a purely choice offer, but obviously it's very much on a case-by-case basis and is in response to what Wye Valley can offer us at that time, short term, as I say, in case by case. So we did the 6 meetings and then created an action plan, which is extensive, and an awful lot of work has been done already to achieve a lot of those actions, and we continue to meet with the staff through a divisional brief and ad hoc meetings. Vicky and I have got a meeting this afternoon with our community teams, again to feedback and hear how they're feeling now, 2 or 3 months later. So there's, as I say, constant ongoing feedback and listening.
Okay, thanks. I just have Mark and then Matthew.
Thank you, Chair, and hopefully it's just to give yourself and the wider board some assurance. The People and Culture Committee spent some time looking at staffing across both the COVID situation and also maternity last week. I know we ran a couple of things. We wanted to understand in more detail the blended care that was being given around COVID, with the various professionals coming together to give that care, and also what this new term safest care meant in relation to being safe or unsafe. And we were assured from our discussions that even though on occasions the care given may have been sort of suboptimal in terms of what would be expected normally, it was at no stage unsafe, and that was one of the assurances we were seeking, and I just wanted to make the board aware of that.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Matthew.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I guess just in one of the questions that I think that I'm interested in, as you know, but also the board would be interested in, given our desire to promote a safety culture where it is encouraged and safe to speak up, the extent to which the 2 whistleblowing members of staff that talked to the CQC, and that clearly led to an unannounced inspection and a lot of extra work for the teams. What support are those 2 individuals receiving? Because it would be terrible, wouldn't it, if they felt in any way isolated for raising that concern. So I wonder if you could update the board in that regard.
For the 2 that raised a concern externally, Matthew?
Yes, those 2 individuals particularly.
Yeah, unfortunately they remain anonymous, so we're not able to reach out to those people directly. I'm hoping that they've taken advantage of the open meetings and have heard and had the opportunity to have their voice heard again, and heard some of the work that we're all going to do together. They, have also had what we've done is shared some information again with the teams around our Freedom to Speak Up champions, so that there's another route for the teams to raise any concerns that they've got. And we continue the team briefs as well, obviously going forward now with the divisional team, and plan to cascade that into the directorate, so then there's directorate specific briefings every month, so that gives people another forum to raise concerns. We've strengthened the leadership as well at ward level, because we've got a number of new matrons, and we're just out to advert for 2 new ward managers as well. So it's about signposting people, hopefully, to raise those concerns internally before they feel that their only option is to pick up the phone to CQC.
Okay. So we're noting all of that, and thanks for the work that you've done. We'll await the CQC report in all of this, and but I want to move on now to talk about Ockenden. But just as a kind of link between the two, I visited the maternity services earlier this week and had a very lively conversation with a group of midwives. Conversations, my experience with midwives, are always lively, but these were lively. And the 2 or 3 things I would say about all of that. First of all, you can never communicate enough that actually, even simple things you might think people understand, often they don't. So you have to keep. This is why the strengthening of ward management, or the equivalent of that, is so important. That clinical leadership at local level is critical. And the second thing that struck me is that in maternity, they are going through the most dramatic change in the way in which we deliver services. And often people don't see it, but it is, and in the sense that it is, large numbers of midwives are having to work in a completely different way. And that's always, that sort of management change is always difficult. People talk about this sort of thing quite a lot, but actually it's really happening. So in the next few months, we will get to over half of all of our births being supported by teams of midwives who work together, who provide continuity of carer to those mothers in a very, very different way. And part of it, I am sure, is the problems that come out of when you're trying to manage change of that nature. So, really fantastic work that Justin is doing in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. But all I can say is that almost unanimously, and this was both, consultant anaesthetists, midwives, and they thought it was the right thing to do, and that this big change that's going on in maternity is already showing real benefits for mothers and babies in this trust. So that's my kind of introduction then to the Ockenden report, which I think Vicky's going to lead on now.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think I will just start this off, and I think obviously from Justine and my point of view, this will take the paper as read. What we wanted to do was, obviously the position in the paper was as of December, and a lot of work has gone on in between, with a couple of different frameworks being produced nationally. So Justine's just going to share a PowerPoint slide which brings up the key points for us as a board to be cited on, so that we pull out the key points for you to know what we're working on from that Ockenden report. But obviously Justine and I will be happy to take questions on the main paper as well, if you have any questions arising. So over to Justine.
Thanks. Can I just confirm that people can see the slide in front of them?
If I get
Yes.
very close.
Fabulous. So as Vicky said, obviously the Ockenden report was published in December 2020, and initially there were 8 categories of 14 actions that we were required to provide evidence and assurance about immediately. with a very short turnaround. This report has been to QGC and TME already, and as Vicky said, we'll take the report as read. But I think this just demonstrates our position at the end of December. You can see on the chart on the left, and then our current position as of the end of January, and some of the things that we have already completed to provide further assurance and compliance. So one of the actions was to agree a process to report SIs to the board, and we have a short report that has been submitted to the board today. That's a quarterly report that will continue now going forward to ensure transparency. We've employed a full-time fetal surveillance midwife. Prior to the Ockenden report, Saving Babies' Lives version 2 of the care bundle required a 0.4 whole-time equivalent fetal surveillance midwife, but we've been able to secure a whole-time equivalent, so they will have much greater impact in that area. We've had agreement to reinvest and ring-fence all money that was received for maternity safety and training. We've obviously required to strengthen our role with our non-executive director working alongside all of the safety champions, and that's quite new in terms of the roles of safety champions, and we're expecting some new information about all of those roles fairly shortly. So we have made some moves already in the right direction. I think it's important to say that a lot of our AMBERs, our partial compliances, that we are doing things, but at the moment we don't have processes to demonstrate the evidence. The evidence is there in our maternity information systems, but we just need to develop with our digital colleagues a way in which that we extract that data and publish that data so that we can evidence all the good work that's already happening. So our next steps are that we've got a much larger assurance tool with all of the recommendations from the Ockenden report that is required to be submitted on the 15th of February, and we're on track to submit that in time. And as I say, you know, we've said that I've already covered that most of our partial compliance is around monitoring of processes, and that will be we should be able to achieve that following the implementation of Badgernet, which is our new maternity information system. So I'll leave it there, and has anybody got any questions?
Thanks, Justin. If you'd like to take that down so we can get as many, take the thing down, thank you. Okay, Matthew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Justine. And for further sort of assurance for the board, Vicky and I conducted a challenge session with the Women's and Children's Leadership team over the gap analysis and the work that they're doing, really just to push and test from my own perspective, from my own assurance that the right things were being done. And I think that was a good discussion. I think, Chair, I wanted, just as Senior Responsible Officer for the local maternity and neonatal system, which essentially is maternity services across Hereford and Worcestershire, including neonatal systems. Just to reflect on a couple of the Ockenden recommendations that impact a bit more broadly than just our organisation. One of the recommendations touches on who is supposed to chair the LMNS, and the recommendation is that it has to be a clinical person. So that's been highly disruptive to us across Hereford and Worcestershire, given that we had a nice balance between a non-executive director from Wye Valley Trust chairing and me as chief executive from our organisation as SRO, and that gave a nice balance across the two. So we've now got a GP leader chairing the committee from I think next month, month after, I think from April. I think the other important piece for the board to be aware is this recommendation that the chair of the Maternity Voices Partnership, which is the group that is there to represent the voice of service users, to make sure that their experiences are played into each of the maternity services, and the way in which mums to be and babies looked after in the community by general practice, there's also been a recommendation that mustn't be a clinical person. Now, our Worcestershire MVP is chaired by a former professor of midwifery who is retired, who doesn't work and hasn't worked for many years in our patch, and is highly challenging on behalf of the service users of the services in our county. And I suppose I just raise that because I think the recommendations are broader than just the ones that Justine has alluded to, and they are perhaps not necessarily fixing a problem that we have in our county, and just making sure the board is aware of that.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. I'll say nothing. Okay, very good. Okay, thanks for that, Justine, and the work that you're doing in relation to all of that. As part of that, so we take assurance that the work you're doing there. As a part of that, the maternity serious incident report 4 to 3. We've got. I can take that for assurance. We've got that. We've done. Thank you. And then let's move on then to the Audit and Assurance Committee report. Anita, welcome to your very first chair of the Audit Committee report. Is anything you want to highlight, or should we take it as read?
Thank you, Chair. Essentially, I think you can take it as read. I think just a couple of things just to highlight. Number one, that on the good news side, we did actually get some really nice internal audit reports that came in, where they reviewed our BAF, they reviewed health and safety, governance arrangements at divisional level, and we were getting some significant levels of assurance and the top grade assurance on our BAF. I mean, this is a situation that I think a couple of years ago we just wouldn't have been there. So I think absolutely to recognise that even on the governance side, we've made some really good progress there. I think the other thing just to be aware, which I know the finance team are very conscious of, is that for COVID is potentially going to affect things like our final accounts and external audit. It's led to backups in local government, and for our external auditors, it means that they're not going to be starting our work as early as they would normally do. I think from talking to Katie and Robert at the moment, we don't see that as a potential problem, but it does mean that they need to get their finger out fairly soon. And so it's just something to keep an eye on, that totally beyond our control. These things are slipping now because of problems in sort of the external auditor system. And it may mean that our teams are put under additional pressure at a time where they probably wouldn't want to be, to try and pull this out the bag at the end of the day. But I think that's all I would comment on.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Okay. I think that's the end of the meeting. Are there any items? Oh, sorry, there are no items of any of the business. Thank you very much for all of that. We now move into our Trust Board meeting as the corporate trustees of the Worcester Acute Hospitals Charity. Any apologies for absence here? I think we've got Vicky Lewis. Rebecca Brown is attending. Richard Oostrom. Anybody else? No? Okay. Declarations of interest. They're on the website. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are they a reasonable reflection? Yes, they are. Good. The report. Mark, anything you want to say?
No, Chairman. I think it's nice and simple and can be taken as read and noted.
Thank you very much. Any comments? No. Very good. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for all of that. That's the end of the two meetings. Can I thank everyone for their contribution? And the board will now go into a private section to discuss issues of a private nature. Can I suggest that the board reconvenes? Is it on? Reconvenes at 12:15. Thank you very much for your attendance, and thank you for watching. Bye.
you.